Dark Souls clones have been around almost as long as Dark Souls now, so we've seen the genre run the gamut. Dark Souls, but it's 2D. Dark Souls, but it's in VR. Dark Souls, but it uses guns. Dark Souls, but it's in the future. Dark Souls, but it's Star Wars. And Dark Souls, but it's terrible. Dark Souls is a genre now, and while Code Vein, one of my favorite games and the one that helped me get into the genre's mindset, was definitely Dark Souls but it's anime, all these games have in common is a dark, brooding atmosphere in a time of lost hope. I often wondered if anyone would tackle Dark Souls but it's cute just to take the piss. Then someone decided to add to the common gothic aesthetic of the Souls-like by turning it into Gothic Lolita, and now we have Dark Souls, but it's a tiny magic girl. So why does this work? And so well? On this Speedpass, let's delve into the early access build of the surprisingly competent Little Witch Nobeta. I don't even remember how I got started looking into this game. Very likely it was a video I saw online that intrigued me enough to make me actually try it out, and even bringing it up to play more or less as a joke on stream, I made note of the overwhelmingly positive rating it had on Steam, and a few in Grindstone said, "Wait, that game? I heard that was amazing!" Definitely not the reaction I was expecting there, and many of us on stream were entertained by the very absurdity of the premise, the surprisingly competent combat, and challenging bosses that I would repeatedly fail at. I chose to play my first playthrough on Advanced for the lulz, and while the challenge was very much there, it wasn't something that I ever felt I couldn't handle. Luckily, if Advanced proves too frustrating for you, you can swap back to Standard from the settings menu, but that drop in difficulty is a one-way trip, so be certain you can't overcome that challenge before you drop down. Besides the cute moe style of the characters, the game uses the standard gothic aesthetic of a giant castle, while also using a bit of a cell shading style, you know, solid black lines and all that. The colors, however, give off a more muted watercolor effect. They're not overly realistic, but what's essentially a cartoony thing drawn realistically, if that makes any sense. Think of the aesthetic of the Valkyria Chronicle games, but without the sketchbook filter. Particle effects and spellcasting go completely ham, though, filling the screen with shake and lights depending on what you cast, and it's really satisfying to watch. Enemies will range from early shadowy blobs with eyes, to those shadows taking on different forms as you progress, or possessing puppet dolls to provide a slight but static selection of potential enemies. Musically, the game also backs its aesthetic, light, ethereal, and mysterious. A combination of simple orchestrations with a heavy emphasis on chimes and a music box feel. Of course, as boss fights enter the fray, the intensity does crank up a bit, leaning heavily on strings and drums. All this is backed by simple sounds, like Nobeta's slight squeaks while fighting, but also gets extremely bombastic when you're casting spells to really sell the power behind a lot of these hits. Starting out, and after choosing your difficulty, Nobeta arrives at the castle, remarking on little more than needing to find the throne and hearing the meows of a cat. From this point on, you get some tutorial tips, locate that cat, and fight a boss to learn what you can about the mechanics. If you've played the demo, the game stops right after this boss. If not, it's just getting started. I feel the controls are a little wonky by default, since there's a mild amount of platforming in addition to the Soulsian combat. You might find the button layout to be absolute nonsense on a keyboard and fantastic on a controller, until you have to aim your spells where the stick is entirely too sensitive to aim it properly, making the mouse and keyboard the ideal way to use the game's main combat mechanic. If only the platforming didn't feel like garbage because of that control scheme. I changed out of my default controls a while back, as I remember the jump command making absolutely no sense to me. I moved it to left alt, as shift was assigned to sprinting and space as a dodge. Dodging and sprinting are used far more than jumping, so this made the most sense as a layout without having to twist my hand into a claw in order to platform properly. There's no fall damage, and you get a double jump at some point, but there's still a lot of hazardous areas where you'll want to take jumping seriously. While unquestionably being Dark Souls Prepare to Kawaii Edition, the gameplay isn't very melee-focused, which places it more in tune with Remnant from the Ashes of all things. Melee with your staff is weak in general, but still useful as it's the easiest way to restore mana. Magic is your main form of attack, and a very easy way to think about how the spells work is to liken them to how certain guns work in most FPS games. A simple left click will cast the spell, and holding right click will give you an aiming reticle. The main mechanic has you pressing R, not to reload, but to charge up a secondary special property to cast a high-level spell. You're slowed down heavily while charging up, but once you're full, you'll gain a special aura and a limited amount of time to cast the spell. You may even have advanced powers while your aura is up. You start with a simple arcane spell, no special properties, and the equivalent to a simple pistol. Charging the spell will give you the arcane cannon, similar to a railgun that will pierce through enemies and defenses. Once you find the ice spell, think about it like an SMG. It does lower shot damage with a high rate of auto-fire, and a drop in consistent accuracy. Charging the spell will grant you an aura that renders you more defensive and grants you immunity to fire. A full charge cast will let you mark targets with the aiming reticle, and firing the spell will drop ice missiles on all your marked targets. The fire spell, unlocked midway through the available content, acts more like a shotgun and is devastating at close range while firing several fireballs in a spread. Once it's charged up though, the aura will grant you more damage if you're using melee. When you fire it, it acts like a rocket launcher, causing a damaging explosion once it hits a wall or a target. There's a fourth spell that acts like another well-known gun, but I'll hold off on that one for a while, for reasons. Melee has another fantastic and arguably more useful application. Once you've gained the counter magic spell, you'll have what's essentially a parry. It's a little tricky to use and has some very tight timing, but the payoff is a decently long chunk of invincibility as you surround yourself with an arcane circle and absorb every bit of magic that enters it. Using this is single-handedly the fastest way to charge magic spells and regain mana. Though you can do that bit by killing enemies or using melee and dodging attacks that would have hit you otherwise. Some boss fights almost require you get parries down to have a really good chance of taking the bosses out. I really like the bosses in this game, as despite having as much trouble as I did when first playing, the game does well to both teach and telegraph mechanics. Listen carefully for audio cues and even subtle but obvious telegraphs. The Spectre Armor's sword will flash right before he does the ground slam. Tanya will swing her arm right before her puppet familiar will attack you, making parries and dodges all that much easier to time. Even a portion of the Monica fight has more than a few opportunities for parries. Speaking of Monica though, can I be real with all of you for a second? Why are gamers so absolutely terrible at giving out guides and information? Okay, slight spoiler for the Monica fight here, but it's a two-phase boss. My original playthrough of the game was struggling to even pass the first phase, but as soon as I entered the second, I could not figure it out. Monica was barely taking damage, and the charge spell that she did would smash away massive sections of the floor, making it impossible for me to finish her off in time. I searched all over the internet for info about the fight, but most people were just saying to bait her smash in the same area by standing on any broken pillars that are left behind, while cycling back and forth onto the floor. Even the no damage run that I found on YouTube did this awfully slow technique and making that phase of the boss fight take an absolutely agonizing 11 minutes to defeat. I was certain that the developer would not have designed a mechanic that absolutely boring, repetitive, and stupid when every other boss fight had solid mechanics and counters. But searching around just kept showcasing that technique, with one going so far as to over-explain how to do it in a wall of text and post a crude set of drawings with stick figures to showcase your positioning. All of those unnecessary explanations followed by, or you can shoot the fireball when she's charging her smash, which will explode and do a ton of damage to her. That's the mechanic! That's what you're supposed to do! It's not an alternate strategy, it is the proper and intended way to kill that boss! She even has a whole separate set of attacks afterwards showing it was definitely what you're supposed to do. With that one piece of information, Monica went from my least favorite boss to my absolute favorite, and I have no idea why so many guys ignored this fact or pretended it was somehow secondary. So I can tell you that the bosses are all very solid and have fair mechanics, and nerds still absolutely suck. If Monica didn't give you a coronary, her defeat will open a section of the map that allows you to back up past the Lava Ruins pit that Nobeta foolishly jumped into for no reason, but this is where the early access version ends. Or is it? First off, going through the door that you were kept from going into during the cutscene will end the playthrough, but it does start you back at the beginning with all of your unlocked spells and stats intact, while boosting the game's difficulty. At the same time, a tooltip in front of that door will warn you of a secret dungeon. I can tell you where it is if you want. Skip ahead like a minute or so if you'd rather just search around on your own. Basically, once you finish off Monica and find the stairs out of the lava ruins, you can take an alternate way up another set of stairs, which will unlock 2 shortcuts back to the very beginning of the game, before you kill the first boss, and arriving at a goddess statue in a main hall. Head into the door across the room that the statue is facing, and you'll see the purple glow of a shielded door crystal. Use the fire aura melee attacks to break that crystal, and you can enter the sealed area across from that crystal. Be warned that that dungeon does not mess around and is a massive difficulty spike in a huge maze-like area. Finding your way through will grant you access to a harder version of the first boss, and defeating it grants you access to Lightning Spell, this game's sniper rifle. Lightning does absurd damage that'll make short work of most enemies if it doesn't one-shot them, though trading that off for a massive amount of mana that's consumed per shot, and a bit of a delay before you can fire it again. The charged aura will boost your speed, and the charge attack drops a damaging lightning storm in a wide area when it's cast. It makes the difficulty boost to the New Game Plus seem almost trivial. Since it is early access, we haven't seen much beyond these 3, technically 4 bosses given, and there's not much word about the game that's been spoken on the Steam page, at least since August. The developer's Twitter account has also been silent since July. I know that some devs like to drop off social media and promotion until they just hunker down and finish their game, but I seriously hope this wasn't just abandoned for some reason. I would really like to see this finished and have a full indie stop done on it, because I can only play through Code Vein and Remnant so many times.